My name's Scott Gray. I'm the aviation director for the city of Buckeye. We have with us our representatives from Dibble, which is Charlie McDermott here, and he will be making the formal presentation. Again, he'll go through most of the stuff that's on these boards and all the information that we have here tonight. Then we'll happily be able to answer any questions that you may have at the end. And then if we get done with that and you still have questions or comments, the boards will all be available on our website. The recorded information will be on our website. And you can always just send me an email after the fact, and I'll be happy to get back to you or get the information from Charlie's team to get back to you. I did want to recognize we have the mayor here. He's joining us because I think he likes aviation. We also have council member in the back. We have 2 council members on the Teams meeting, so we have the city representatives are here and interested in hearing the presentation as well as your comments and questions as well. So with that, I will hand this over to Charlie, and Charlie, you can walk through the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I know the boards are a little difficult to see from where you're sitting, so as Scott mentioned, I do encourage you to come up here afterwards, take a look at them. We're going to be available for the evening to ask questions and talk to you about them in a little more detail. But I'm going to go through the boards, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So we're talking about the Buckeye Municipal Airport Master Plan project. An airport master plan is a 20-year development plan for an airport. So we started this process a couple of years ago, and we're pretty much through the midpoint of the study, that being the alternatives phase. So when we look at an airport master plan, this is really the heart of the master plan study, is the alternatives, because that's where we look at how are we going to achieve the vision that we have for the airport. So we do that through alternatives. So this is the meeting that you want to be at. So briefly, I'm going to go through the airport master planning process, and then we're going to talk about the alternatives that we developed. So the airport master plan process is broken up into 4 big chunks, so to speak. We look at the inventory of the airport, what the vision is for the airport, and then we develop forecasts for what we think is going to happen in terms of airport operations and aircraft at the airport. We develop those forecasts. Once we develop the forecast, we look at facility requirements, basically a gap analysis. What do we need to satisfy the forecast that we've projected for the airport? And then we develop alternatives, and then we develop a capital improvement plan, basically phases the development out so we can figure out how we're going to those elements. So very briefly, that's the process that we go through. Always in an airport master plan, there's a public engagement process. That's what this meeting is intended to satisfy tonight. This is the second public meeting that we've held. The first one was back in September. So this graphic just represents what's available for public engagement and the importance of it for the process and to help guide the airport development. As I mentioned, we did an aviation demand forecast. That resulted in, again, this is based on 2024 data. So today we have about 79 aircraft based at the airport. We're forecasting that to go to about 89 long-term. So a pretty significant growth, so to speak, for the number of aircraft that we anticipate being based at the airport. In terms of operations, today, currently, there are about 122,000 operations. We're forecasting that to go out to about 166,000 operations over the course of the planning period. Again, these are just forecasts. Certainly, reality is always somewhere in between what we forecast and in today's activity. Currently, the aircraft that operate at the airport are envisioned to continue, but we do envision that larger aircraft, and again, they're designated by alpha and numerical numbers. We won't get into that detail, but for example, the existing aircraft today are categorized as A2 aircraft. We're envisioning that in the future, it'll go to a B2 aircraft, basically a little bit bigger airframe. And then ultimately, we believe the airport could see C2 aircraft, which are much longer, business jets and so forth. So we go through that planning process. The forecast goes to FAA for approval. There are two things that must be approved by FAA: the demand forecast and the airport layout plan, which is also referred to as an ALP. Those are the two elements of the master planning process that FAA approves. So those are two very important pieces of it. Once we get an approved forecast from FAA, we develop the facility requirements, basically looking at what do we need to do to the airport to satisfy that demand that we are forecasting. So we look at what we need in terms of runway capacity, runway lengths, taxiways, aprons, hangars, all those support type facilities, fueling facilities. We develop a matrix that delineates what facilities are needed to satisfy the aviation demand forecast, and then we develop the alternatives. So when we look at alternatives, we come up with how are we going to configure all those improvements on the airport in the most economical, safety, layout. All of those metrics are considered when we look at how are we going to achieve those alternatives. Certainly looking at cost is always a big factor, as is potential environmental impacts. So the alternatives are measured against the matrix of how we evaluate them. We rank them, we score them, and then we push forward with the various alternatives to see how we're going to achieve that. So when we look at the facility requirements and how we evaluated them for the primary runway, we look at extending the existing runway out to 7,300 feet, which gives us an extension to the north. So we came up with 3 different alternatives to achieve that. One puts the entire extension to the north. Another one shortens it up, so we keep the runway protection zone a little bit shorter, and we can get the road around. So basically, the second alternative gets it out of the highway right away. So we slid it down a little bit to do that, and then we have to accommodate the 7,300, we have to tack on a little bit on the south end. The third alternative is pushing it even further, so we can get the road around and get the RPZ and the road away from each other, because we like to have the road outside of the RPZ. That's a real important aspect for FAA. So when we do all that, we evaluated it. The recommended alternative is the first one here, which again, I encourage you to come up and take a closer look at, but it puts the entire extension on the north end of the runway. Okay. We do show a potential relocation of Yuma Road. Again, this master plan won't resolve how we address Yuma Road, just to acknowledge that something needs to happen with Yuma Road in terms of if we extend this end of the runway, we got to do something with Yuma Road. Okay, so that would be a subsequent study to address how we would address that. So for the primary runway extension, it would be an extension to the north, 1,800 feet. So now we know that there's a crosswind issue at Buckeye, and we look at ways to solve that. We know if you look at if you were here at the first public meeting, or if you looked at the chapters that are available online, we know that there's a crosswind challenge with the existing runway. So we look at, well, how are we going to solve that crosswind wind coverage issue? FAA has in their guidance that one of the ways is to widen the existing runway in lieu of a crosswind runway. That's not the preferred method of addressing a crosswind component, but it is one way to address a crosswind element for your primary runway. And most of the time you see that if this runway was in a canyon and there was mountains, and obviously can't build a crosswind runway. So perhaps widening the primary runway would be the best that you could do. But we know, given this environmental setting, that we don't have a situation like that. So we can look at ways to address the crosswind by constructing a crosswind runway. And we also have to consider the potential of widening the existing runway to address that wind coverage issue. So we looked at widening the existing runway. We looked at various configurations for a crosswind runway. And we did, again, coming out of our first public meeting in the first chapters, we identified that the alignment for a crosswind runway would be best served at 10-8. So all of the crosswind runway alternatives consider that alignment. So when we evaluated that against the criteria of wind coverage, land acquisition, costs, feasibility, we arrived at this alternative number 4 would be the best location for a future crosswind runway to satisfy that wind coverage issue. We did not, as I mentioned, we consider widening the runway, but when we evaluated that, still alternative number 4 in this location is the best location for a potential crosswind. We do show it at a length of, what do we have for a length? 6,000. So we show the crosswind runway length at 6,000 feet. Okay. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that future of that crosswind, but for the short-term initial construction of a crosswind runway, we have it shown at 6,000 feet. Right. So this footprint, what we do here is, so we have there's a runway to taxiway separation standard that we have to achieve. So we looked at alternatives to widen that out. Again, with a 400-foot runway to taxiway centerline separation is the most desirable. But to meet FAA standards, we could narrow that up. So we looked at ways to narrow that separation to reduce the impact and to see if there's more efficiencies in keeping it closer. Most always, you're going to want to try to get the 400-foot runway to taxiway separation if you can achieve it. There is an issue with eligibility, but there are ways to work with FAA around that if you can justify it. So for the crosswind alternatives, refining those a little bit, we arrived at the bottom one here, alternative 4C, as the recommended alternative for the crosswind. Okay. So now when we take that alignment 4C and we project out to a 10,000-foot runway, we hold this end of it, the east side, and we extend to the west to give us the 10,000-foot alignment. When you look at the alternatives for the runway extension, the crosswind alternatives, the refinement of the crosswind alternatives, this is the recommended plan that we arrived at for the planning period for the airport. Again, recognizing that we want to make sure that we can accommodate an additional extension for that crosswind, because ultimately, when you go through our document and you read the logic behind it, at some point, this main runway could be changed over, and this could become the primary runway for the airport. So we want to make sure that there's an adequate space, land availability to get us out to that 10,000 foot on that crosswind runway, which could ultimately someday be the primary runway. Okay. When you look at the surrounding land uses, certainly there's going to be an impact. What land the airport owns, what land the airport is going to need to accommodate that future crosswind, potentially future primary runway at that alignment of 10-8 out to 10,000 foot. So this graphic shows the land uses around the airport or for the airport, and what land would need to be acquired to satisfy that, to accommodate that. Okay. And then the last one is a carryover from the recommended, and then we add in a parallel, again, just to show how the airport could grow to accommodate ultimate development at the airport, whether that's through additional or the addition of cargo, military operations, commercial service, whatever demand presents itself. This configuration basically allows the airport to grow into this ultimate footprint. Okay. When we look at the airport master plan, this layout would be the layout that we would present to FAA, and we would seek to develop into the airport layout plan for which FAA would approve. But this layout gives you the ability to grow from that to this ultimate vision of what the airport could do. Okay. So I know that's a lot of information, but Scott and I and Thibaut, my support, can
Charlie, thank
answer
you
questions.
for that presentation. Let me just clarify the difference between all of these boards and the last one. So all of these boards are to get us our requirements for our airport master plan, which is a standardized study that all airports do, looking at a 20-year time frame. That's the standard, and you can only justify the things that are in that 20-year time frame based on what FAA approves on the forecast that Charlie was talking about. While the forecast that we have has been resubmitted is not very aggressive, in my opinion, it's likely we will reach those numbers sooner than the planning periods that have been identified. So we'll likely reach some of those triggers before the 20 years is met. The last study is a subset of the master plan, which is called the Airport Long Range Plan or Airport Long Range Development Plan. That's looking beyond what FAA can approve and review. That's a vision that the city has for what we believe this airport can transition into in the longer term. Just because it's the 20 years to the 40-year time frame doesn't mean that's when it'll happen. It could happen sooner. It could happen later. There's a lot of pieces that make that determination. And I'll give you an example of Williams Gateway Airport. Is everybody familiar with Williams Gateway Airport out on the east side of town? I happened to be involved in that project when it was the military base and converted it to civilian. That was over 30 years ago. It's taken 30 years for them to start reaping the rewards of that transition and the success of that airport. They do have commercial service, they do have cargo, they do have military, they do have a lot of other stuff, including ASU and corporate activity, but it's taken 30 years to get there. So it's not going to happen overnight, but their model was different from the 90s to today than what our model might be, just because the vast amount of growth that's going to happen in the West Valley. We could see it happen sooner. We could start services sooner than we get to the crosswind 10,000-foot runway. We could start with something that has a necessity for a shorter runway. All of those things are to come, right? The reason we do these plans is to kind of get something on paper and then stop looking at the years that it was projected and start looking at what's happening. So as the airport grows with the use of aircraft operations, the type of aircraft operations, then we will pivot and adjust to meet the demands of those particular aircraft, whether that be for hangar storage, parking, whether that be for air traffic control, navigation aids, runway lengths, all of those things. While the plan kind of shows, well, you kind of periodically move to the next step and you keep building stuff. The real world doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in a timeline. It works to respond. And I like to say that the airport needs to respond at the speed of business, not the speed of government. We have to be able to respond and be able to have facilities ready to go when folks need them. Right now, we're behind that power curve. So we have some things in play right now that'll hopefully get us there a little bit quicker. But we also have to follow the FAA's process to construct those things. We have to do environmental studies, et cetera. So what would be nice is we could start construction tomorrow. That's what we would all love to do and get these facilities ready to go for everybody to use, but it's likely going to take us several years to get through the federal process to move forward. But we are looking at ways to fast track that without circumventing any procedures. Just follow the FAA regulations and EPA regulations. So hopefully that kind of described the two different studies. There's a third study, but there's a third study that's going to follow up. It's likely going to start here in the next several months. It's going to be called the Airport Specific Area Plan. And that plan will be headed up by our development services team and our planning folks. That will look at land use surrounding the airport, not just right on the airport property or what we're showing here. Likely go out as much as 4 or 5 miles, and it'll look at zoning to protect the airport from residential encroachment. As you've probably seen at other airports, residential encroachment ends up creating all kinds of animosity between the community and the airport. The vision here is to try to protect that before that demand starts showing up. So that study will follow our study and then provide all of that information to the property owners and the developers and the citizens of what the overall projected idea of the airport environment is in order to not have encroachment or height issues, et cetera, et cetera. So, did I miss anything?
Oh, excellent. And I think, you know, you're at a point in time where this is so important because we can't undo it once residential has encroached upon the airport. You can't go back. So, you know, I've always thought Buckeye is in such a unique and wonderful place right now because you have the ability to set your course for the future. You're not locked into, well, you know, we can't do that because this is over here. Well, we can't do this because that's over there now. You know, it's almost a blank slate. So this is you're at a very unique point in time that many airports across the country would love to be in this position where you have the ability in a blank slate to paint your picture for the future. So that's good news.
And just to follow up on that, that's been some of the challenges of why some of this planning takes so long, why the forecast isn't approved yet. If you look at all the other airports in the valley, a lot of the things are already in place. Deer Valley Airport was, you know, really constructed in the 70s, and now it's one of the busiest general aviation airports in the country, right? It takes some time to get there. Where they were, or Scottsdale Airport, or any of the other airports when they were in the 70s and 80s timeframe. We're just behind that curve. Why is that? Not because the city didn't care, certainly not because we didn't have people that wanted to use the facility, but the demographics weren't out here yet. The economic development wasn't out here yet. Now all of that is really starting to kick off very significantly and will be exponentially growth rather than just steady growth like some of the other communities have seen. But doing these studies all together, including the third one, just allows us to protect what everybody else couldn't when they went through this in the 70s and 80s timeframe. It's really, you know, I've been doing this for 35 years. I don't think I've ever seen an airport do it this way. And that's a good thing. This is way ahead of the thinking of how to make sure that this airport has a long-term need and use for the city and the surrounding areas. So with that, I think we can ask questions. I did see a hand over here. Yes, ma'am. Sure. So let me kind of give a little bit of piece of that, and then I'll get to your answer. So back in December, the city applied for the federal contract tower program. So there's two types of towers, one that's run by the FAA and one that's run by the FAA, but the controllers are contractors. Sky Harbor, Scottsdale, and Deer Valley, I think, are the only federal towers. All of the other towers at all the other airports are contract towers. So It was a program that started a number of decades ago to find a cheaper method of providing that service for smaller airports. I think there's 260 or so contract towers across the country. So just within the last week, we received confirmation we've been officially accepted into that program. The FAA does a cost-benefit analysis, and it's a fancy way to say they compare how many operations, the type of airplanes you have, and what's going on at your airport to how much are we going to have to spend to make this work. You have to have a 1.0 cost benefit in order to qualify. We had almost a 2, which means we definitely need a tower. So how do we get there? Well, the contract tower program, the letter we got back says you have 7 years to get to build a tower, and then we'll staff it for you. 7 years is too long. We're at 122,000 ops last year. We may be on target this year for 150,000 ops. Likely can't wait that long. So we are exploring other alternatives, like what about military? Did they stand up temporary towers all the time? Maybe they need a training home. Maybe they can help us out. We're also looking at other temporary towers that maybe we can provide, and then the controllers can be provided by the FAA program while we're going through the 7-year process to construct a more formal tower, permanent solution, and then various other ones. So ultimately, to get to your question, the goal would be, yes, it would be there to provide services for the next 20 years or beyond. And most of the time when an airport builds a tower, they probably aren't going to touch that tower for 40, 50 years later. Generally, what happens is the tower is shorter because you've got one runway, maybe 2 short runways, and you only need the tower just has to have visibility to see all that stuff. What happens is when you start extending the runways, they can't see them, and then you have to build a bigger tower. So like Phoenix Sky Harbor, I don't know if you've ever seen the little tower that's on the south side of the airfield when you're driving down I-10 by Qatar Aviation. That was their first tower. I don't know what it was. It's probably only about 80 feet tall. You now see they're on their 3rd tower. The 3rd one is 230 feet, I think. It's huge. They had to build that because they started building extra runways and you couldn't see the ends. Gateway just went through the same thing. They had the military tower. They just built a new one. So the intent would be to build a tower that would foresee our planning period at least. Likely if we get into the longer range plan, depending upon where we find that location, because they have to be able to see everything, we have to do a siting study. We will determine what that need is there, and then it's possible you could come back later and expand that facility. So long answer to your question was yes, it's supposed to be able to handle the 20-year planning period. If you know any controllers, we'll happily talk to them to come over right away. But a temporary solution is what we're looking for right now, is to get something in place without having to wait for the next 5 to 7 years to get through all of the siting study, environmental, et cetera, et cetera. Other questions? Yes, sir. There's kind of 3 phases, right? The initial phase is to handle the smaller airplanes. So I want to say it was 4,600 feet, somewhere in that, less than 5,000 feet, right? Because you're pretty much talking about flight training aircraft. The next one, which was recommended, was 6,000 feet, which gives us a broader range of airplanes, but still longer than what we currently have, but it won't be as long as our primary that we're going to extend, which will be 7,300 feet. And then ultimately, 8,800 feet was the ultimate. And then when you get to the long range plan, it's 10,500 feet in 2 of them. Yes, we already did that.
Yeah. When
Correct.
Yes.
Ultimately, yes. So the question was there a weather study? All of that information was done when we did the inventory phase, and that was at the previous meetings. That indicated that we had a shortfall in wind coverage for smaller airplanes. So that's where that concept came by, and the discussion that Charlie talked about the 5 alternatives. One was widen the runway, and then 4 different locations. That was to meet that requirement that the FAA requires us to look at the wind coverage, which we didn't meet. That was what that was for. The 10-8 alignment actually provides us better wind coverage than our current runway. So at some time in the future, it's highly likely that that crosswind runway will then become the primary runway at some point in time, right? It could happen sooner than later, just depending upon how users come to the airport and the types of airplanes that we have. When we make that transition, then it's a possibility that at some point in time that the current runway would then just go away, and we would end up with the 2 runways on a 10-8 alignment, which provide all of the wind coverage we need, and it'll provide the appropriate length, 8,800 feet, and then a smaller training parallel. If you look at the layout from the master plan to the long range plan, the 8,800 foot runway would then go out to 10-5. The shorter runway that was for training would turn into a taxiway, and a new 10,500 foot runway would be south of that. So we're reusing those facilities with not having to tear them up and discard them. So we ultimately may see that 1735 will not be used sometime in the future. We just don't know when that trigger will be.
Scott, and one thing on the lengths though is when we get to the crosswind runway, when we get to that point, what this master plan strives to achieve is what's the alignment and where is it going to go? The actual length that would be revisited at that time, whether it needs to be longer than what we propose or perhaps shorter. What's important is what's the alignment and where is it going to go? The length, that would be to be determined at that point. What is really necessary?
So in it,
yeah, I misspoke. So I didn't have Tebow next to me.
yes. So let me also go back to your question about the weather. We also did a full airspace analysis and shared that with Luke Air Force Base and FAA to ensure that there was minimized interaction with the Luke mission. That was a very high priority for us, is to not create a situation that degraded Luke's mission. 10-8 does not do that. I mean, obviously it does change things, but it doesn't degrade their mission from what they're doing. They'll still be able to transition to the training areas, et cetera, et cetera. The second part of your question was the extension of the current runway, and your question was specific about. Correct. That's Yuma Road. So the runway is shown to extend right up to Yuma Road. Ultimately, if you look at the pictures over there, Yuma Road is showing as a potential temporary loop to go around it. There's other roadway improvements that are proposed in that area, including an interchange for Johnson, an alignment of Bruner to go over the freeway, some other things that are going to change that may or may not eliminate the need for Yuma to continue to go through, because there'll be other access ways to get to the west side of the airfield. But at the time we have to open the runway, Yuma can't be there. So options include the relocation as it's shown, tunneling where it is. It will remain a 2-lane road. Tunneling where it is, or closing it. Those are all options, and traffic engineering is working with us to see how they can marry that up with these other improvements to continue to provide access to the west side of the facility. Yes, sir. Yes, all of the above. All of the above have had some sort of a conversation. Now, again, it's like anything in aviation. We can really want it, and especially like passenger service. So anybody that's been involved with passenger service development at small airports, you can want it all you want. You can throw all the money you want to at it, but they're not coming if they don't want to. If they don't have the demographics to say that that's going to work for them, the airlines aren't coming anyway. So same with cargo. Military is a different animal. From FAA perspective, we can't plan facilities for military. Doesn't mean we can't have them there. We just can't plan for them in a formal master planning process. We are looking to have a solution for them, whether that be an emergency divert field, whether that be for other military units, whether it be fixed wing or helicopters. We are engaged in those conversations. On the other side, for fixed base operators, flight schools, yes, some of those conversations are already taking place, whether it be a Part 141 or a 91 or 61, sorry, flight school. We are having conversations with flight schools and other entities to build hangars, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those conversations are taking place. Again, we may be in the infancy of being ready for that, but now's the time to make all those things happen because it's just going to make sense. Yeah. So like, the things about commercial service, ultimately, and I usually mess this up, and I'm sure the mayor will remind me. I believe we are about 650 square miles, roughly from the prison to the south, Gila Bend, all the way up past the white tanks. The city of Buckeye is one of the largest footprints city around. We will be bigger than the city of Phoenix, right? Now, that's kind of interesting to say. I know the mayor enjoys saying it. It's hard for me to say it, and I've lived here a long time before I moved and came back. But the reality is all of the growth of the metropolitan area is all going to be on the west side because everything else has already grown all the way up to either state or federal lands, and it can't grow anymore. It's got to come this way. So what do you see that's happened? Shipping, warehousing, all those things are happening. So cargo is likely something that could happen much sooner because that's already in our backyard. You need a good population base to support the commercial service. And while we're making tracks for that, I want to say we're give or take 140,000 people, let's just say. I'll use mayor math. Isn't that what you say, mayor math? We're at 140,000. That's probably not enough quite to support commercial service, but the infrastructure and everything else that's been built around us from an economic development standpoint can certainly support the rest of those. FBO is one of those to provide the services to the users. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Sure, and that's a great question. As part of this study, there will be a noise analysis that will show the noise contours. We already have those published now for our existing alignment. So as part of this study and part of the long-range plan and then the subsequent plan, all of those future noise footprints for the larger airplanes will all be analyzed, and then the zoning and so forth will be addressed so that we do not have any incompatible land uses within the noise contour or within the operating area of the airport. That's the intent. So certainly there might be overflights. There's probably overflights just about everywhere in the valley right now. But the alignment of that runway will be shown and the associated flight paths and noise contours to show that where they're at relevant to the future development. Correct. So that would be what's called a FAR Part 150 noise compatibility study. And that would be a future study that would potentially take place. We're obviously looking at protecting that before those homes are that close to the airport right now. Most of the development around the airport is agricultural. But there are, yeah, 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 most of our traffic that arrives and departs don't go that far to stay in our traffic pattern. A lot of the traffic that would be as far as Tartesso is actually traffic that's either coming from Deer Valley and coming around the backside of the mountains to come to us, or vice versa. They're leaving, but our traffic pattern would not do that. The larger aircraft that you'd referenced earlier would use the 10-8 alignment, and they would not be going north. They would all stay to the south until they have a significant altitude because they have to interact with Sky Harbor's traffic. I hope that answers your question. I did see another answer. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. So the extension to the north, which is this one here, 1,800 feet, I'd have trucks out there tomorrow morning building it if I could. But we have other processes we have to follow. We have to follow the NEPA process for environmental compatibility. We're examining options of what that would look like. But let's just say on the surface, if we follow the normal process that everybody would follow, that's probably 2 years to finish that. At the end of that 2 years, you get hopefully a FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact to any environmental concerns, including noise and all of the other different categories that they examine. Then at that point, we can start either design and or construction. The environmental will have the design of that runway to at least 30% design. So when we get the FONSI, we would finish the design and start construction. So let's just say everything perfect world would be 4 years. My world, it would be done next summer. But we can't circumvent some of the federal processes. We have to finish those. So about 4 years, we hope to have that runway extended. Somewhere between now and then, we hope to have a tower solution in place, whether it be temporary or semi-permanent. The ultimate permanent location would probably not happen for about 7 to 8 years, is what we're seeing most of them go through. And then you would start looking at the rest of that development based on what's happened at the airport. So just because the study said, okay, in 2035 you needed this, well, if we don't have the traffic to support it, we wouldn't pursue that to be built. But if we were exceeding all of our numbers and we're full, we have no place to park airplanes, we will likely go back to the FAA and have to revise this plan to reflect what we believe should have been reflected now is the significant growth that's going to take place. But unfortunately, the system doesn't allow us to show that projection and that much growth. Why? Because most of the time that doesn't happen. All right, so we're an anomaly. If you look around the country, there's not many airports that are going to have this kind of significant growth from 50,000 to 95,000 to 122,000 to maybe 150,000 in a 4-year time frame. That's highly unusual. So we're on rapid growth, and most of the time, the federal government doesn't move rapid, right? Sorry to say, and they're going to see this video, and I've told them, I've done this for a long time, for 35 years. I've been a planner. I've done 30 master plans. I've done noise studies. I've done environmentals. I've run 4 airports. I'm not making this up. Their process sometimes doesn't meet reality. And, for those that don't like the federal government, I guess that's not a news flash. I'm not bad mouthing them. I'm thinking their process doesn't really align with something that's not normal. If we're Deer Valley or Goodyear or Glendale, when they do their master plan, it's pretty straightforward because all this stuff's already in play and you're having, incremental growth. We're having significant growth. So we're going to see some things that are going to have to happen much more rapidly. And I believe we will exceed our forecast within the first 5 years. We'll exceed this 20-year forecast from an operational standpoint. Everybody's happy? Oh, Dale. Sure. The question is to touch on instrument approaches. So currently the airfield does not have any instrument approaches. When I got here a year and a half ago, I made the request just before the deadline, come to find out after the fact, that we would like GPS instrument approaches to both runway ends. We got our nose under the tent. We got approved. We have two RNAV approaches, one for each end, that is currently designed. We are doing some improvements right now for those are our tenants. My apologies, we're closed for 2 weeks starting today as we're doing some improvements to the taxiway, and we're going to do improvements for the non-precision markings and lighting that we need. So the FAA can do a flight check here this summer, and then we are scheduled to be published in March of next year. So we'll have instrument approaches March of next year. Again, another thing that most other airports already have. But for corporate folks that need to use the airport when they need to use the airport, thank goodness we don't have that much weather, but when we do have weather, that will be the difference between somebody being able to get back. No, they'll be extinct. ILSs are right now typically at commercial service airports because for the longest time, the commercial service aircraft didn't have GPS capability for those that are airline pilots. I think that's changing, and I think we're going to see that the technology for ground-based navigation, which an ILS is, Sky Harbor has them. I think they're the only, well, no, I think Gateway used to have one. I think they still have one on their center runway. That's it in the valley. So when pilots need to train, because they're going to the airlines and they need ILSs, it's one of those two, which it's not going to be Sky Harbor. It's likely going to be Gateway, or you're going to go into the 10,000-foot stack down at Casa Grande because they have one. So the ILS is going to go away. I don't know when, but my guess is GA airports are likely not going to see them. You're just going to have GPS approaches. And by the time we get to commercial service or cargo, I believe that most of those fleets will be retrofitted to accommodate some sort of a GPS system. Yes, ma'am. I think you had a question. Yes. Only 3 years. And I say that kind of jokingly because every place that I've been the airport director, it's not uncommon. We had people 10, 15 years on waiting lists. And the reason for that isn't because we don't want you to have a facility. Most of the time it's economics. Yes, we can get somebody to build new hangars, and we are exploring that right now. We have interests that to build corporate box hangars. We have interest to put in T hangars. The difference will be is you're paying $175 a month now for the T hangars that we have. The fair market value for T hangars is probably somewhere in the $600 or $700 a month range. And that's why most airports aren't building them, because most of the GA community doesn't want to pay that amount of money. And that's why there's a shortage everywhere. I don't care what airport you go to. I know Falcon Field's got like 400, and their rates are in the 250 range, I think. But they've already met with all their tenants, and they're going to increase all their rates by 25% over the next 3 years. So it can be closer to a market rate. But to construct new hangars, the pricing just ends up being higher than most of the general aviation population's willing to bear. But yes, we are looking at places. We're looking at redeveloping our existing hangars so they're a little better quality. They've been around for a very long time. I think their useful life has passed, and we're talking to developers that might be interested in helping us retrofit those, including FBO services, additional maintenance services. All those things are being looked at.
Well, we will be here for another hour. So if you,
As long as you want to talk.
Yeah, yeah. Folks want to take a closer look at some of the boards, ask more questions, we're available.
And we'll go ahead and close the formal part, but if you have any questions, at the end of the day, the boards, the video will be available on our website. Give me a day or two to get that up. My contact information on the website, so if you wake up in the middle of the night and say, wow, I forgot to ask this, just send me an email. Happily get back to you. If I don't have the answers and it's relevant to our planning process, I'll get with Dibble and we'll get you the answers that you're looking for. But we appreciate everybody taking the time to come out this evening. And again, we'll still be here for as long as you have some questions.